Yeah. So in the last class, I talked about two sorting algorithms, both of worst case time complexity big of n square. So let's look at some better algorithms. Uh, so I am not going to depths. I will only give you some intuition of what is going on. So first one is called quicksort. It was developed by the British computer scientist Tony Hoare, I think. So he won, I mean, the Turing Award. So Turing Award is a Nobel Prize of computer science. So the idea is, uh, given an array, you place. So you first try to partition it. So how are you going to do the partition? You place. So you consider the middle element. Okay, and you place the element which should come here to this position, and then you will then get a partition of the left subarray and the right subarray. Then you repeat this operation on the left subarray and the right subarray. So by doing this, the so you see the number of times it can, I mean this can take place if it is divided in basically two halves perfectly, is what? Because you are dividing it into two sub arrays, right, left and right. So it will go on until you are left with a single element. So naturally, for that purpose, the number of steps, if the split is perfect, for example, it is every time it is getting divided into basically equal halves. Okay, in that case it will be log n to the base 2 number of steps, and each step you can do maximum n operations. So let me show you one operation. How can you actually divide this? So this is the most brilliant part of the algorithm, and yet it is quite simple. And so this is called the partitioning step. So what do? We consider the first element to be something called a pivot element, and we set low, that is an index to the lowest part, or basically the zeroth element of the array, and up to 4. So in this case, up is basically corresponding to the last element, and low is corresponding to the first element. So the condition is like this. So array is ARR. While ARR is less than pivot, and of course it is within the range A plus plus. So here this is less than pivot, right? 1 is less than pivot. So in that case it will increment. So if this condition is true, there will be an increment. So I has come here, and on the other side there is something called J. So basically I is pointing to the next element of pivot, and J is pointing to the last element. So while ARR of J, this element is greater than pivot, decrease. So this is not greater, right? So that's why it is here. So then there is a check. If I is less than J, which is true, right? Then there will be a swap. So after this swap again, this will continue. Like I will keep on, keep on increasing until this is, greater than, this is, less than pivot. So it will come to this position, and J will decrease if it is greater than pivot. So it was greater than pivot here, right? Because after the swap it was 5, and it has come here. And since I has overtaken J, I would have been, basically would have come here, and the loop terminates. Whenever basically I has crossed J, then the loop would terminate. So we are doing this swapping because, why are we doing these two checks? We want to find, first we want to find an appropriate position for the pivot element, and we want to send the elements which are greater than pivot to the right hand side and less than pivot to the left hand side. So that is the whole purpose of this partitioning. And finally what we do, we swap this ARRJ with pivot. So you see that after this step, so in the sorted array, this is the right position of 4. You see that there are 5 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the elements, and 4, this is the right position of 4. So now this partitioning will be done on this left subarray and the right subarray. So this will go on until the array is sorted. So let us see maybe the example. This is quick sort, right? So if I take the same example, 41532. 41532. Sorry. 41532. Right. So here you see that, yeah, here we see that this is the initial array and pivot was 4 and 5 and 2 got swapped, right? So after this we have this, right? Okay, so this we get finally 4 is in the right position. Yeah, 31245 we have. So yeah, so 4 is in the right position. Now the algorithm will run on 312 and 5. It won't run on 5 because 5 is already sorted, because it is a singleton subarray. So in 312 it will happen. So partition is at 3, and you see that 3 is placed here at the last position, and then it will be done on 2 1. So partition will be at 2, and 2 and 1 will get swapped. So finally we get the whole sorted array 1 2 3 4 5. So this is a very efficient algorithm. So this, sorry, yeah, this, so this goes on like this. So partitioning, so we choose an element pivot, and usually it is it can be taken to the first element, and after pivot is placed in the expected position in the ascending order, the left subarray, that is from 0 to pivot -1 and pivot plus 2 dot dot n minus 1. So the array elements are from 0 to n minus 1, of course. This is I mean, the partitioning is actually basically recursively called for these two subarrays until each subarray contains single element, right? So this is the thing. So and basically it is called, I mean, recursively. So quicksort is a recursive function, and it calls partition, and after each partition quicksort is called, I mean, recursively towards the left subarray and right subarray, and this goes on, right? So this is how you actually call the array, call the quick subroutine array 0 to n minus 1, and this basically goes on. So best case and average case is like this. So it will go on until we are left with a single element. So from an array of size n, you come to size 1 in log n to the base 2, approximately this many steps. So this is same as the binary search, right? Binary search, I mean, search space, I mean, reduction. And in each partition, so at each pass or each step, you can have maximum n operations. So these are, both the elements are getting compared with pivot, right? And that's the only operation that is taking place. So so the upper bound is n. N is the number of elements, and it will be less than n in the subarrays, right? Because the subarrays will be of sizes much less than n. So at each step, the number of operations will be n, and total number of steps will be log n to the base 2. So it is basically upper bounded by n log n to the base 2. So it's basically I mean, we go of n log n to the base 2. But what about the worst case? Worst case is the one where after each partition, the left subarray is of size 0 and the right subarray is of size n-1. So that can happen if the array is in descending order. So if I run this code, so let's do this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you see that what is going on. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. After 5, 4, 3, 2. So after the first pass, you see that the pivot was 5, and you see that 5 is placed in the right position after pass 1. Then it is the subroutine of quick is called for 1, 4, 3, 2. Then what will happen? 1 is or actually in its right position, right? So then the subarray will be 4, 3, 2. Then 2 will sit in its right position and the subarray will be, sorry, 4 will be in its right position. Then the subarray will be 2, 3. Then finally we are left with only 2 elements, and they will be divided into 2. Basically this will be the pivot, and the other element is singleton element that will end. So you see that each time the sub array is decrementing by size of 1, right? Because every time either the left sub array or the right sub array is of size 0, because it is sorted in decreasing order, right? Because if you basically run this algorithm, you will see. So the number of steps it will take will be n-1, because every time one element is getting eliminated, right? Because that is a pivot element, and the search will continue with the remaining elements. So this will take place for basically for n-1 steps. So at each step, the number of operations is maximum n. So approximately the total number of steps is n into n-1. So it is basically upper bounded by n square. So this is as bad as a bubble sort or a selection sort, right? So I told you that this is a better algorithm, right? Well, this happens only for the worst case. So it happens only if the array is arranged in such a way so that the either the left or the right subarray is empty. That happens mostly when it is sorted in the decreasing order. So to prevent that, you can do a search. You can do a linear search to see whether it is already sorted in the decreasing order or not. Then you may choose not to use this. But that is a rare case. In general, on an average, this worst case doesn't come up. So it can be shown that even if it is highly unbalanced, that is, suppose you have 100 elements and the left subarray contains a 1 element and the right subarray contains a 99 or 98 elements, in that case also the complexity remains big O of n log n to the base 2, because in that case for the right hand side only I think the number of steps will be log n to the base, I think 100 by 99 something, but you can show that that is upper bounded by log n to the base 2. So if we ignore the worst case, it is always upper bounded. So basically its worst case time complexity is big O of n log n to the base 2. So that's why it is a preferred algorithm in many situations, and it is not too difficult to understand also. It is of course more complicated than selection sort and bubble sort, but it is highly efficient in most of the cases if we basically leave out the worst case. And one final algorithm is a merge sort, which we discussed in the last class. One last sort, so this last sort, that is a merge sort. So this is considered to be undoubtedly the most most efficient algorithm. Among the popular algorithm, of course. There have been some other improvements. So okay, so there is one thing. So there can be one other improvement, right? If you can choose the pivot randomly. So I told you that you are choosing pivot to the first element. You can choose pivot any other element, right? Then only it will. Then also it will work. But for the worst case, it has been found that this trick doesn't work. So for the worst case, it is again big of n square. So merge sort. So before going to merge sort, let's look at something called merge operation. Merge operation. So we have two sorted lists, A and B, containing n elements. N and m elements respectively. So what we do, we compare the first elements. Okay, and we put the smaller element to another empty array, that is C. So we have an empty array C, and we compare 1 with 2. 1 is smaller, and we put 1 to C. And we move the index to the next element of A. Next element of the array whose element you have basically copied to C. So then we compare 3 with 2, because 2 was the small was the bigger of these two, right? So now we compare 3 with 2, and we continue this. So since 2 is smaller, you put 2 here, and you increment the index here. Then you compare 3 with 4, then you put 3 here because 3 is smaller. Now see that this array has ended. So then what you do, you simply copy the remaining elements of the other array, which is not, which has not been traversed, into C. So now you see that so we had two arrays, A and B, which were sorted. Now we have merged them to create another array C, which is also sorted. So you see that the maximum number of comparisons you have to do is m plus n. So so m is length of this, and n is the length of this. So the maximum, so the time complexity is basically upper bounded by m plus n. So it is basically linear time. Mostly it is linear time, right? So this merge sort will be important. So this merge operation will be important in merge sort. So what does it do? Given an array, it breaks it down to singleton elements. Then it applies merge operation on sublists of sizes 1, 2, and so on. So first it applies it on the consecutive singleton elements and merges them to elements of size 2. So for the elements which are not, so suppose the elements which are basically odd are basically carried forward, and at one step they are merged. So this works perfectly for arrays. For n is the size of the array, where n is 2 to the power of some k. Where k is basically greater than or equal to 1. For the remaining sizes, it does something so that it is adjusted at the end, right? So this basically goes on. So from sizes 1, it comes to size 2, then it comes to size 4. So it merges the arrays of size 2 to this, and finally before the final step, it basically merges with basically the leftovers. So this is again merged. So each operation can take maximum n checks, right? Because at each operation you are doing So you are applying this merge operation, right? So in this, so maximum, so the if the length of the entire array is n, the most expensive merge you are going to do is when you have one array of size n-1 and the other is of size 1, right? So it cannot be more than n at any step. And how many steps do we need? It is again log n to the base 2, because if you go in this direction, you see that we go on until we are left with single element. So that will take place for log n to the base 2, but to get the exact number, you need to take the ceiling operation. So in this case, n is 5 and log n to the base 2 is more than 2, so it will basically 3. So basically, so here it is more than 2 square, right? So if it is more, number of elements is more than 2 square, then you basically will need 2 to the power of 3, log of 2 to the power of 3 steps, that is 3 steps. So log 2 to the power of 3 base 2 means 3, right? Because log 2 to the base 2 is 1. So that is not a problem at all. So number of steps is log n to the base 2. So this I mean the ceiling is just to see that the calculation is all right. Otherwise it is as good as log n to the base 2. And at each step you do only merges, right? So in merge you basically don't do more than m plus n operation. So m and n, so you can also say n1 and n2, where n1 and n2 are the lengths of a and b respectively. So in this case, as I already told you, the biggest subarray, so the most expensive merge perhaps you will be doing when you are just prior to getting the full array. So it is n-1 and this is 1 and it cannot be more than n. So each step you don't do more than n comparisons, and number of steps is log n to the base 2. So it is big O of n log n to the base 2, and it is always like this. So best case, worst case, average case, always it is like this. So that it doesn't have any worst case at all. Always it is n log n to the base 2. So there can be multiple approaches doing it. So so we are doing it in a bottom-up approach, and there can be top-down approach where basically recursively the whole array is broken down into singleton elements, then the merging is taken place. So that is a recursive step, that is called a top-down approach, and in that case it is more expensive, because you see that when you use a recursive call, you need to call the arrays, basically you need to do these recursive calls, you need to use this stacks and all these things. Bottom-up approach can be done, so this particular approach can be done in an iterative manner. And merge sort was designed by two scientists, Hermann Hein Goldstein and John von Neumann. I believe they were Germans, but it is as old as 1948, just after independence of India. So that was it. And yeah, time complexity is always this big O of n log n, but disadvantage is that it requires an extra space. What is that extra space? You see that you need a C, right? So in order to do this merge, if you implement this, you would always need an extra storage space of size n, right? So that you will need. So that is a disadvantage, but that is not a big disadvantage because size is not a big concern nowadays. So this were about, so I'm not going into the details of the implementation. I'm sure you will get a lot of implementations online, and I will share a code with you. So I have the code, but I'm not running it. I'm sure you got the idea. So the purpose was to give you some idea of the better sorting algorithms. But of course, these are quite old algorithms, and a lot of improvements have been done over the time. And since we have some time left, let's quickly go through quickly go through a concept called preprocessor. Like we used several times we use this hash define, hash included, and all these things. So this is a preprocessor directive. So this is something placed before the main, beginning with hash. There can be macro substitutions like hash define. There can be file inclusion like hash include. There can be compiler control. These are slightly more advanced. And this is done before compilation. So what does that mean? So when we write pi, hash define pi, for pi, no space is allocated in the memory. So this is not a variable. So basically, before compilation, there is a step called pre-processing, right? Where this macros are substituted, like this line is eliminated, and instead of pi, 3.14 is substituted in the code itself. So if you want to look into this, you have to run a command like gcc, something like this. So it will basically generate the intermediate files also. There, if I can show you this, so this is a code. So this is a code macro.c. So this is a code. So if you can see this, hash include stdio.h and hash define pi 3.14 void main float r equals to 5.0 and printf pi r into r. This I have done. Okay. And I have compiled it using this particular statement. So here, so minus, so you know, right? So this is the output, and minus WLL means it will show you all the messages and all the warnings, and minus save minus TMPS means it will show you all the intermediate files prior to compilation. So I am running this. I am basically compiling this. So it gives a warning that there is no int. So that is a warning. But it has generated a lot of files. If you can see this, sorry, it has gone out of the screen. Oh God. Maybe I need to reduce this. Options, text, select, maybe 12. Yeah, this is better. So a lot of files have been generated. Ls, does this work? Yes. So macro executable .o.s.i, a lot of things are generated, but we will look into macro.i. If you look at this carefully, so since I have included hash this stdio.h, all the functions defined in stdio.h are here. So if you can see printf should be here. So all the versions of printf are here. So since I have included stdio.h, all the versions of printf are here, right? Sprintf, everything included. So this is like the import function in Python. So you see that you can see all the stdio.h functions, like all the file operations and everything is here. So it is now a part of the actual code which is going to be compiled. So you see that this code is so big. But I cannot see the bottom. What is going on? Oh gosh. So it is not showing me the bottom. Oh God. Will this work? Something is going on. But if you basically look into this, you will look something like this. So if you run this, you will see that. So suppose I compile this using this, there will be, so this is called volume.c, and you will see that this hash defined will be eliminated, and pi is replaced by 3.14. So this is exact replacement. So if you write something like this, say hash define a x plus y and b x minus y, and if you use a by b, so it will write x plus y by x minus y. So it will a mistake, right? Because you meant within bracket x plus y. So x is 5, by the way, y is 6. So this thing will happen if you put this brackets here, then explicitly this brackets will put. So it is blind substitution. So it will substitute so the format is like this. So it is hash defined identifier string. So the identifier is pi and string is 3.14. So identifier will be blindly substituted by the string 3.14. So that is one part. We can also have arguments, like if you write hash define square x into x, then, and if you write square 5, then 5 into 5 will be put here. And we already know about hash include file name, right? So in this case, file name will search only in the standard library, nowhere else. But if you write hash include something here, then it will first look into the current directory, and if it cannot find it in the current directory, then only it will look into the basically the standard library of C. And there are something called compiler control also. Here, if some identifier, say pi, is not defined, then you can define. So if not defined pi, for example, then define pi 3.14 end if. So to ensure that the definition of a macro identifier is actually done inside, and if you want to ensure the removal of a particular definition, for example, you want to define pi something else, and you want to undefine the existing definition of pi as macro, you can do this. If defined identifier undef, so undef pi 3.14. Okay, this you can do. So these are some, I mean, these are very important points, but I'm not covering them in details due to the want of time. And you can also write something like this. If so suppose pi is defined, you have defined pi somewhere, okay, either here or it is defined in your header files also. Somewhere it is there, because as you see that when you include hash, if you write hash include something, everything you have included have become a part of the code to be compiled. So when you have include something, it is a part of the entire code. So printf and everything is already, the code of printf is a part of this code also, although you have not written them since you have included them. So if suppose if def hash, if hash if def say pi, if it is done, if it is defined, then suppose you do something else, you don't do something else. So for example, there can be operations like, if it is a Windows machine, use something, I mean, specific to Windows, for example conio.h, for example. If it is not a Windows machine, then don't use conio.h. Something like this you can do. And there is something called a stringing operator, which converts a string, basically an argument to a string. So if you write hash define strs hash 5, and if you write str hello, then this hello will be converted to a string, and that string will be printed here to the console. Right. So this is called the basically the stringizing operator. And finally, there is called a token pasting operator, basically the concatenation operator. So if you write combine s1 s2 s1 hash s2, it will mean that if you write combine a and b, so what this will produce, it will produce ab. So you have ab here. So if you do this, so this will be replaced by AB, and here the value of AB is 5, right? So that's why 5 will be printed. Okay, so this was a very short trivia about macros, and there is something called flowchart, which I think you may be aware of. So suppose I want to write a flowchart of a program where I input two numbers A and B, store it in a sum. So basically I store the sum in sum, and I output sum and the greater of these two numbers. So start and end is indicated by this oval. Any process, so process here is say sum A plus B, is indicated by this rectangle. A decision is indicated by a diamond, and parallelogram is used for input output of an operation. So this is the start, this is the end, and there will be arrows, right, to show the control of flow. So here this is the start and this is the end. I input A and B, I sum A and B, and I stored it in sum. Then I check if A is greater than B. If it is yes, then I print sum and A. If it is no, I print sum and B. And the control, I mean, returns to the course of basically, I mean, to the flow of logic, and it ends here. So it is a pictorial representation of workflow. It is popularly used to show a stepwise representation of an algorithm. But it is used as mostly at, I mean, school levels, or mostly for the academic purposes. There are many advanced diagrams like the UML diagram, flow diagram, state diagram, all this, I mean, the sequence charts, which are used at industry, I mean, level codes, where they have more functionalities. I mean, there can be ER diagrams, like there can be I mean, entity, I mean, relationship diagrams, which have more functionalities and more features which you can add.